Well, good afternoon, everybody. I guess it's still good morning, kind of, sort of. It's 11:15. I'm Genevieve Wood, senior contributor at the Daily Signal, which is at the Heritage Foundation. And this is the June Conversations with Conservatives. It's an event that's hosted each month. We may take off August, but we're usually here each month, hosted by three members, Congressman Huelskamp, Congressman Labrador, and Congressman Jim Jordan. And then they invite other members of Congress to come and join the conversation. You see some of them coming in. We have Congresswoman Black, Congressman Bratt, Congressman, Gosar's here as well, great. And so others may be coming in. This is really open and for you, for them to discuss what they'd like to talk about, but also for you all to ask questions on any topic of your choice. I only ask that you please state your name and the organization or affiliation that you're with so that they know who they're actually speaking to. We're going to get started. We may go a little past noon since we're starting late this morning. Before I open it up to the floor, I wanted to direct one question to the members who are here. You know, it's June, and the Supreme Court has got a lot of decisions it has not quite yet handed down yet that we're all waiting on, one of which deals with Obamacare, the King versus Burwell decision. There's been a lot of talk in the past, certainly on the campaign trail, about how Republicans wanted to repeal Obamacare and start over. Have not heard as much about that as of late, and wanted to get the reaction here from the members in terms of where you all, regardless of what happens with the Supreme Court, but certainly if the court rules against the Obamacare legislation, where you all see this debate going and what you see the Republican Party doing. And I'll throw it, Congressman Labrador, will start with you.
Well, the first thing is that we do need to continue to talk about repealing and replacing Obamacare. And I think there's some fear in some circles in the Republican Party that if this decision goes our way, that it's actually bad for us. And I'm having a hard time understanding that because if it goes our way, then it will be exactly as we've been saying, that the way it was passed was wrong, that it was illegal, and there might even be some constitutional issues with it. If anybody loses their subsidies, it's going to be because the president and his party decided to write the law in a way that was wrong, and then to enforce the law in a way that was outside of the law. And I think the Heritage Foundation just came out with some polling data that supports that supports that the American people understand that this is the president's law and that whatever bad comes from it, it is his issue and his party's issue. And I think that if we start panicking at this time, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take all of the heat coming in our direction when it is his party and his administration have created problems with this law. We have always said, and that's, you know, Republicans need to remember that we won in 2010 and 2014 on a few issues. It was on repealing Obamacare, on stopping the president's unconstitutional actions, and those are the things that the American people wanted us to do, they elected us to do, and recent data shows that we as a party are losing even our own base and our own party because people are afraid that we're not sticking to our principles. So we need to be very careful how we react, and the most important thing is that we do not overreact to the decision because this is all in the president's hands.
Anyone else like to comment? Congressman Gosar?
Yeah, I think we should have dialogued with the American people a little bit more. Number one, in the marketplace, I was a dentist for 25 years, so I understand the marketplace. There is no marketplace. I think what we need to do is when America finds out that we've spent $179 billion on behalf of the insurance industry with the best profits that they've actually seen, it's time for them to get rid of their exemption from the antitrust laws. Let's find out what we don't know about what's possible in the marketplace. Let's rebuild that marketplace. Number two is expand the population base. How about our veterans? Are they really liking the kind of VA care that they are receiving? They're not in my state. And so I want to see them get onto the open marketplace where the federal government will pay their premium and pay their deductible, and they can go to anybody else that they want to. I think that what we have to try to look at is how do we fight with this president when he's not going to accept anything that we put forward. I think what we have to do is do incremental applications like repeal McCarran-Ferguson to open up the marketplace and put HSAs into place where people actually get defined contributions into those aspects, tax abilities for people to actually to put money away to take care of themselves. And let's see what the marketplace actually does for us. And I think that would be a very hard vote for anybody to actually take down.
Yeah, I just want to add to the comments of the two representatives who just spoke. We put in place healthcare at the central planning level with the federal government in control. most every Republican creed starts off with a commitment to the free market system. And so now, just as Representative Labrador said, when that system breaks, as they always do, right, the history of nations is the history of that failure. We're the unique outlier country that has relied on free markets for the last 200 years, and we're the richest country on earth as a result. And so when you put central planning in, and then it fails, then, as Representative Gosar said, there is no market. That's a truism. And so then the question to ask is, how do you fix failed central planning? And the answer from the other side, and from the people who get it wrong, no matter what side they're on, is let's do more central planning to fix the central planning that just broke. And then when that breaks, which it always does, the remedy will be more central planning to fix the central planning that just failed in central planning, right? And so the free market logic is different. It's, hey, if you need a social safety net, as Milton Friedman said a long time ago, just give people cash. Don't let the federal government run it, whatever you do. And so we're back to first principles. We're seeing a failure in front of our eyes. I think everyone on this panel has shared similar logic as to the response. We don't want to over-respond with a centralized remedy when that will fail as well.
I certainly agree with my colleagues on the failure. The American people are seeing that. In my state, we see premiums suggested to go up by 36% this upcoming year. Even the people that now are considered to have coverage are finding that they really don't have coverage because their premiums are so high, their co-pays are so high that by the time they get ready to use the services, there's nothing there for them. They can't afford those co-pays. We can certainly say that the president is, at this point in time, seeing these failures as well, although they won't admit it, and they're not going to do anything with a market-based, patient-centered change here. So the Supreme Court is going to give us an opportunity to be able to make some of those changes. I think number one is that whatever we do should say there is no more individual mandate, there is no more employer mandate, and we go back to giving people choice in a marketplace where it is patient-centered, and give them an opportunity to make those choices. Now, having come from a state where we had the pilot project for Obamacare, Tennessee was the state that when Hillary Clinton had the idea of a single pay system, she came to the state of Tennessee. And because of our governor at that point in time had a good relationship with Al Gore, who was then the vice president, they decided that they would try this little project right in our state of Tennessee. I wasn't there, but the tale goes is that they actually drew up the plan on a cocktail napkin at a cocktail hour at a bar. I don't know that for sure, but it's an interesting folklore, one that I can see as we look back over our shoulder at what it did to the state of Tennessee. It seems like that is absolutely where it must have been drawn up because it didn't work. It was breaking our state. And that's really what brought me into politics to begin with. I ran for the state office because I, as an emergency room nurse, saw what was happening in our state related to our healthcare system that was breaking the state and doing nothing for quality care. But what I do know is once there was a decision made that we could no longer sustain the then program called TennCare, which was a single-payer system, as we wound that down, there were some things that happened along the way that were casualties for people, and that is that they lost their care in the middle of some very difficult times for them, whether it was cancer care or a heart transplant. So I think as we do look at whatever we do to replace what's there, we've got to be cognizant that there are human lives that will be affected by this. So we've got to have an off-ramp where there is a safety net, and then we have to bridge to something that is patient-centered, market-based. And there are a lot of good ideas out there. The RSC has a good program. So we're not short on ideas. We just have to be sure that we don't forget that these are human lives and that whatever we do as we transition, we want to make sure we catch people that really do need that care and we don't leave them in a lurch without good medical care.
Representative Black raises some great points, and situation in my home state of Kansas is shows definitely it, current system's not working. I think if, as far as the off-ramp, we could look at a high-risk pool, which is actually illegal under Obamacare. We had one that was working in Kansas, and according to information I've been told, the current premiums are higher than they were for those currently under Obamacare in the state versus what they would have been under the high-risk pool just a few years ago. The highest premium is from a few years ago prior to Obamacare is now lower than the Obamacare premium across the board. That is a situation that doesn't work. The $500,000 deductible doesn't work, and so we need some change. What I'm most worried about is when we hear Republicans in Washington say, "Hey, I'm afraid that we're going to win this court decision." 57 months ago, we had the leadership in the House at that time had the Pledge to America 57 months ago and said, we will repeal and replace Obamacare. And I've served, I think Diane served as well, and Raul and Paul. We've been here for about 54 months. We've had no votes to replace. Nothing to point out what we're for. And it's no shortage of ideas. And the Pledge to America had great ideas. We haven't passed those. And that's one of the things I've been talking about individually as far as reconciliation. We should have done it. And the question now is, can we do it? Yes, we can. Yes, we can pass a replacement. Yes, we can do things to fix the situation. We can make it better. We just have to take the votes. We have to bring those to the floor. But I think the worst possible outcome would be the right Supreme Court decision that recognizes, hopefully, justices that actually read the law and read the Constitution. I think a clear reading of both would say it was implemented incorrectly. But the worst possible outcome response would be simply to extend Obamacare until another election. That not only squanders the policy opportunity, but I think it squanders the political opportunity of getting the right thing done and doing what we said we'd do in 2010, 2012, and 2014.
All right, thank you all. You're going to select to chew on that topic. Other questions on this topic? I'm happy to go to the floor now or move to something else. Yes, sir, just please your name and affiliation.
Garth Camp, Wilton Daily. If the Supreme Court rules the way you hope it will, you know that the left is going to try to blame you.
If you could please use the microphone.
I'm sorry.
So people are listening.
Certainly. If the Supreme Court rules as you hope it will, you know there's going to be a media blitz and a concerted effort to assign the blame to you. Do you have a strategy to deal with that? Not just deal with the substance of fixing the problem, but making sure that you're not thrown under the bus?
It's amazing that we don't have a strategy right now as a party. We've known that this was coming. There's still some ideas that are floating out there, and I think we do need to make sure that we sit together as a party and hopefully have a unified voice on what needs to happen. What I'm concerned about is that I don't know that we're going to be able to have a unified voice because of the voices that keep saying that they're afraid that we're actually going to win this case. It's kind of like the dog that's chasing the car, and they're feeling that way, and I don't feel that way at all. I think this is good for us as a party if we can show that the president illegally gave subsidies to certain individuals, which is what we have been saying all along. And that same message that we have been saying all along is what gave us the victories in 2010 and 2014, two of the biggest victories that the Republican Party has had in its history. So we shouldn't be afraid of victory. We should actually embrace the victory and show the American people how we would do it better as a party. But there seems to be a clear lack of direction on how to approach this, and I think that's rather unfortunate.
I would like to chime in on that one. I think, we've been devolving healthcare in this country since the late 1960s. So to fix it all in one application isn't going to work, and America understands that. I think you say, listen, what we're going to do is take it to the lowest common denominator and make all parties be on a level playing field to compete within that marketplace and come up with new ideas and new products out there. That's what they get. I talk all throughout Arizona, and they like that application, saying, listen, I want the insurance industry to compete for my dollars. Give me more choice and opportunity. Expanding the pool, that's how you're going to win the day with America. Keep it to no more than 4 points. Have a direction where you got these plans. I mean, Tom Price has got a plan, Bill Cassidy's got a plan, the RSC's got a plan. Point them in a direction, but you're not going to replace it right now with this president overnight. But give them a solution that says, okay, When insurance companies compete, you get different opportunities. You get choice. And I don't know of any head of a household, ladies, investors, that don't want choice. They want to pick. And I think what you do is you start listening to them what the products they're going to have to come up with, engage them in that discussion, give them flexibility, and also devolve this back to the states in the safety net.
Thanks, ma'am.
If I could just weigh in for a second on this, you probably, I'm sure all of you, because you're very informed in here, have read the op-ed that was put out by the 3 committees of jurisdiction. That is the Ways and Means Committee, Education and Workforce, and Energy and Commerce. And they really are the 3 committees that have jurisdiction over this issue. And as there are not details in it, but I think as Representative Gosar has already indicated, there are guiding principles in there about the off-ramp, of how you make sure you have a safety net for those who will be affected by this. And then how do you have a bridge into something that is more patient-centered and market-based. And so the guiding principles are there. The details, I think, will fall out at a later time. But the message to the American people should be, we have a better solution for you that is going to give you more choice, as Representative Gosar has said, where anytime you get more choice and more competition, you're going to bring down the cost. Well, if that doesn't resonate with people, they want the cost to come down, they want to have choice, and they want to know that there are going to be things out there that they can make that decision, whether it's a healthcare savings account or whether it's a full complement of things that you need because you have more healthcare issues. But that's the message that needs to come out from our conference. And I, again, agree totally with Representative Gosar, is that you can't do this overnight. We have a president who's not going to work with us, but we've got to have a glide path to get us to where we want to go, looking to the future when we'll have a different president sitting in the White House.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Genevieve. Switching topics for a bit, I would like to ask the panel, I'm sure you've read the reports today that we now know what the Pope's encyclical on climate change is going to say, which is essentially that this is a reality here, that, as he said, man is primarily responsible, and he's going to weigh in very strong on the side of climate change. This has been known for some time. My question is, we know the universal popularity of Pope Francis as a personality. How are members of Congress going to react? And more significantly, what does one do when he's already invited to address Congress, will be introduced by Speaker Boehner, and will take a position, most likely, that's completely the opposite of the majority? I'd like to ask Congressman Huelskamp, goes to Mass and passes the basket every Sunday, to begin.
And that's John Gizzi of Newsmax.
Well, I have not read the encyclical. I don't know if it's officially been released, John, on that, but I find it interesting that as far as the American media, on one hand, they want to report on the topic they agree with the Pope on, but statement after statement after statement on non-negotiable issues like life and marriage and family, that's unreported or misreported by the media. I mean, the Pope has made multiple statements on these that the far left would disagree on. But as I look forward to his statements or his address to Congress, it's my hope he will identify long-term, non-negotiable statements about humanity. Now, the debate about global warming and whether or not we're actually in a cooling age again and who's taking those measurements and what they mean, it'll be interesting to see what the statement is. And oftentimes the Catholic Church has had a long experience in science and directing mankind in a direction of more measurement, more understanding, and more use of the scientific method. But the statement, if the encyclical identifies man as the primary cause of that, I doubt it will identify the necessary solutions I don't think it will be prescriptive in that manner, that somehow that if the U.S., for example, is the one to shovel the burden, if there indeed is one, I doubt that'll be in that nature. And but we'll look forward to see what that says and add it on to numerous other encyclicals. But that would be an interesting one if it provides the scientific data as the background of that.
You know, my dad's a geologist, and when you study geology, you understand that climate has changed over the whole lifetime of the planet. So I'm going to go back to the Paleozoic and Mesozoic periods. What's so interesting about that? Well, 80% of the animals that were at the end of the Mesozoic or Paleozoic era went extinct. The reason I bring those up is man wasn't here, wasn't even on the earth. And so to have this kebab about that it's global warming and climate changes all the time. And to say that man is the sole responsible aspect of that, there's an example right there that shows you quite differently. There are events that are occurring that are out of our hands. So from the standpoint of what I see for Pope Francis, I think there might be a conundrum there for him to have a conversation about.
Yes, sir, Rabbi.
Wes Cooper-Smith, Generation Opportunity. In the post-USA Freedom Act Congress, are there room for additional privacy reforms, such as Congressman Massey's amendment to 702, or even the Email Privacy Act?
Well, 702 is going to be renewed, I believe it's next year, reauthorized. So there's still a lot of room for further amendments, and that was what some of the people who voted for the USA Freedom Act, who still want further amendments, that's why they voted for the USA Freedom Act. I voted against it because I didn't think there were enough amendments, but some really strong civil, privacy advocates were saying that we still have other opportunities to change 702 and other different areas. So I think we're going to have other opportunities. I think Massey's going to continue with his amendments and with his proposals, and I think we're going to have many, many opportunities to guarantee the civil liberties of our citizens.
Hi, Josh Siegel with the Daily Signal. I wanted to ask about trade. It looks like this could get pushed back to late July. Kind of what do you see the outlook as right now? I mean, obviously Democrats are saying this is up to Republican leadership to solve. Republicans are saying it's Democrats' issue. This is Obama's trade agenda. I mean, what do you feel like the outlook looks like in the next few months? And for the conservatives who didn't vote, for TPA, I mean, how would it get to a place where you would support it, or are you just opposed in general?
Well, all along we've said three things make sense to us. Not have TAA part of the deal. Obviously, that was reflected in a vote last week where it looks like it doesn't have the votes to pass. Not have TAA part of the deal. Allow rank and file members to have some of the same rights and privileges under the TPA process that currently only reside in the Ways and Means Committee. There's some checkpoints along the way that we think make sense. Mr. Mulvaney and a group of us sponsored an amendment that laid out those checkpoints, all these guidelines that are in the process that are supposed to be met by the administration when they're negotiating this agreement. And then the third thing was, we now believe that Export-Import Bank is directly linked to the whole process, because when the bill was in the Senate, Ms. Cantwell held everything up when she demanded to receive a vote on the Export-Import Bank on the floor of the Senate, and was given some kind of assurance that would happen, and then brought votes to TPA. So those are the three things we have presented all along. They're still out there. We hope we get a chance to work with our leadership to do a trade package that makes sense, that keeps the safeguards in place that we think are in Mr. Mulvaney's amendment, doesn't have this new social welfare program that's TAA, and says that the Export-Import Bank is corporate welfare and it should go away. And we continue to offer those three things.
It's important to note that there's three things that we were asking for as members of the Freedom Caucus, those of us who are members of the Freedom Caucus. But on the substantive issue, I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding. Paul Ryan keeps saying that we as members have more rights than we've ever had before when it comes to trade, that we are not ceding our authority, and I just disagree with him. If you think about fast-track legislation, fast-track is not a trade bill, and anybody who keeps arguing that if you're against fast-track, you're against trade, they're not telling the truth. You can be for trade. I voted for every single trade bill that has come before the House. You can be for trade, but you can, as a member of Congress, you may want to have a little bit more authority over the dealings of those trade issues. The Constitution gives us the ability to vote on tariffs, and if it's a treaty, it's only the Senate that votes on it. So our leadership says that TTP and all these other trade bills are actually tariff bills, and that's why they come to the House and they come to the Senate. We're ceding our authority as members of Congress, and we're saying that we're only going to have an up or down bill, an up or down vote on these trade bills. So all we're asking for substantively is that it's not just the Ways and Means Committee that decides whether TPA is turned on or off, is that every member of the House should decide whether whether the fast-track authority is going to be turned on or off. That's all we're asking for. Our amendment obviously had 8 different times that we did that, but we can negotiate on that. But the issue is that I'm not willing to give up my authority as a member of Congress to represent 800,000 people. I represent the same number of people that Paul Ryan represents, that any member of Ways and Means represents. Why should they have the sole authority to decide in their committee whether TPA is turned on or off, whether fast track is turned on or off? I don't think that's fair to my constituents. And we're not, and many people say, well, don't you trust Paul Ryan? Well, we need to remember that if we trust Paul Ryan, that's fine, but he's not going to be the Ways and Means chairman for the rest of his life. He's got other ambitions, and he's not going to be here forever. So it's whether we trust just a small group of people in the House to make a decision that the entire House should be making. And that's what this fight is about. And don't confuse that with whether you're for trade or whether you're even for TTP. Many people could vote against TPA and vote for TTP. Because you could be for the final trade bill and not be for the process that gets you to that trade bill.
In fact, there's a piece in, of all places, the Daily Signal today by Mr. Riley, who makes that very point, that you can be strongly pro-trade and yet have concerns, valid concerns, real concerns with what Mr. Labrador just described, the fast-track process.
Let me ask one follow-up on that. What about those who say, but you all are holding President Obama and this trade deal to a different standard than past presidents, particularly Republican presidents, have been held when it comes to trade deal and giving them fast-track authority and TPA? Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal today. Larry Summers, who used to be the head of Harvard and a high-level economist, noted that it is significantly different than every trade agreement. He says this trade agreement deals very little with tariffs and prices and trade, and much more with regulatory, labor, environmental, immigration, et cetera, issues. And that's why President Obama calls it the most progressive trade bill in our history. And so I think it is different. It also sets up a commission with a living kind of formulation in the bill itself, right? A commission. It's not the European Union, but it's not just a trade agreement. So that also makes a distinction. And finally, I mean, just this isn't absolutely related to the question you had, but at a 30,000-foot level, it's just interesting what's not in a trade bill. Other commentators have noted that the U.S. is just habitually getting rolled right now. We're getting rolled by the Middle East. We're getting rolled by Russia. We're getting rolled by China. Well, here is your opportunity. Here's the clout of the United States of America. And if you combine your trade policy with your foreign policy, with your military policy, with your foreign aid budget, with your immigration policy and access to the United States higher education, patent, R&D power, that's a superpower. And we're the only one left. And so the idea that we're getting rolled, it's somewhat because we're not strategically linking the power of the United States to get the rest of the world to behave themselves. And this isn't trivia. I mean, some of these countries are engaged heavily in human slavery. There's some awful stuff going on in the Middle East. I think we all know what's going on. And so here's our chance to get some good behavior on human rights and some discipline across the world, and we're squandering it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I might add a few things. I do support TPA and voted that way on Friday. I do not support TAA. And thirdly, as I see TPP now today, I think it's a big winner for our economy. It is still being negotiated, obviously, and includes many aspects of trade and both tariff and other non-tariff trade barriers. But what weighs heavily in my mind, representing the 1st District of Kansas, is the unfair situation we have today, that if you want to sell beef into Japan, you have to pay a 38.5% tax in order to do that. What have our negotiators been doing for the last decades that we allow Japanese products to come in here, but they charge us a tax for us to sell into Japan? At the same time, if you're selling beef from Australia into Japan, your tariff is half that. That's unfair. Even more unfair if you're a Kansas wheat producer, and we're in the middle of wheat harvest. In order to sell wheat in Japan, you get charged a 252% tax to do that. It's time that we move past the Washington politics and the foreign governments who are saying we can't compete. Now, I know there are other industries across this country that can't compete, and I understand that. But particularly for agriculture and other industries, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's patently unfair. Washington should find a way forward that we can sell our stuff and compete, because I believe at the end of the day, American ingenuity, whether it's in agriculture or other industries, we're able to do that. Now, this convoluted approach and with TPA and TA and those kind of things, what they had to get it through the Senate, I understand that, but at the end of the day, I find this TPA is more open, more transparent, and more accountability than we have in any in the past. But I am still frustrated that we have to go through this process. The free trade leader in the world, and we're still being stuck at a marketplace after marketplace in the industry that I represent in the 1st District. We've got to find a way to bring down those tariffs and those other non-tariff trade barriers. Because when that happens, and the idea that, well, we can wait longer, well, you know, whether it's a month, whether it's 2 months, or whether it's 2 years, that's stuff that we're producing in Kansas that we can't sell because of foreign countries. And I visited with the trade representative last week. I think as TPP stands now, as it's being negotiated, that there are enormous wins for producers not only in Kansas but across the entire country.
Just very briefly, I represent, of course, the state of Tennessee. About 800,000 jobs there depend upon trade. We have a big agricultural community, and as Representative Holzkamp has just indicated, we need to be sure that our products are being sold without barriers to other countries. And so I did support TPA. I did not support TAA. I do not believe that TAA is fair to those who do not have an opportunity to get the same benefits if they lose their job for any other purpose. You know, a company may close down in the district because someone has decided they want to retire and they're closing down their company. So I believe that we should have a level playing ground and not the welfare that's given in TAA. But my motto is, let's make it here and sell it there. 96% of our customers are outside of this country. And my district is high in manufacturing, and my manufacturers want to be able to make their product here, create good jobs, and stimulate the economy by creating those good jobs and selling their products offshore. So I say let's make it here and sell it there.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Bring the microphone over.
Thanks. Christina Marcos with The Hill. Some of you voted against the rule last week to bring up the trade package, and were among those members that voted against it and nearly derailed the entire process before it even started. First of all, did Speaker Boehner express his displeasure? And secondly, will any of you be voting against the rule later today to extend the revote to the end of July?
I didn't go to conference this morning, so I don't know whether he did or not. I heard a report that he did. He hasn't said anything to me. I'm sure he will at some point. I think many of the people who voted against the rule felt it was inappropriate for our leadership to continue to negotiate with Democrats without negotiating with conservatives in the House. And what seems most interesting to me, that this is the second or third time that they negotiate with Democrats, and the Democrats go back on their word, and they still don't come to the conservatives to talk. We can help them. with this process. And we can work with them, and we are willing to work with them. But the issue is, if you remember, I can't remember when the Farm Bill passed, but they had the same embarrassing episode with the Farm Bill, where they thought they had a deal with the Democrats, and the Democrats walked away from that deal, and they left them on the floor hanging. They just did it to them this last week. And the irony to me is that I knew the Democrats were working on that for a week, and somehow they didn't have any idea that the Democrats were working on that. So either they're not listening, or they're completely unaware of what's happening in their surrounding, and they're only talking to special interest groups that go to the fundraisers with them. And I think that's the failure of this leadership, is that they don't listen to what's happening on the floor. They don't listen to what's happening to the dissatisfaction of many members of the House. And they're not even aware of what's happening around them. And I think they need to be really careful with that, because if they would have come to talk to me, I could have told them what the Democrats were doing, but they never asked. And they're not willing to work with some of us, and that's okay. You know, I came here to represent the people of my district, and I'm going to do the best to my ability. But I think they need to have they need to really have a personal assessment of what's happening, and the level of dissatisfaction that people have here in the conference is pretty high. It's not just the 34 people who voted against the rule, because voting against the rule is almost like, you know, committing a capital crime here. And we know what's going to happen to us. We know that the leadership is going to come against us. We know that they're already telling our donors not to give money to us, which, by the way, I think is unethical. We know exactly what they're doing, but the reality is that we're not the only ones that are dissatisfied. And that's why we asked last week. We said, you know, before we have this rule vote, why don't we just have a special conference to talk about this TPA? There's some dissatisfaction about TPA. There's some issues that we could address on TPA. They weren't even willing to have a special conference. And I think that's rather unfortunate. So if the speaker wants to talk to me, he can. He hasn't taken the time.
I would just say, you know, whether there are repercussions or not, I mean, people, I think members know if you vote against the rule that there's going to be folks who don't like you doing that. That to me is not the criteria. It's you know, the overall policy, the rule itself, and the objectives you're trying to accomplish. I think the bigger point is the one Mr. Labrador raised, which is Pew Research a few weeks ago did a poll. 65%. Do you know why 65% of Republicans don't think Republicans are doing what they said they would do? Because we're not doing what we said we would do, right? So that's the bigger problem we have, and that's what we have to focus on, and that's what drives, for those of us who are members of the House Freedom Caucus, that's what drives us to take the positions and the actions we do. It's we think we have to focus on, and this is right from our mission statement, all those American families who think this place doesn't represent what they care about, what they stand for, and what they elected us to do. So that, to me, is the overriding issue in how we make decisions on votes. Whether there are repercussions or not, that's, to me, beside the point. The point is our base, our voters, the people who elected us, gave us this overwhelming majority, the largest we've had in like 80 years, they expect us to do what we told them we were going to do. Stop the presidential executive amnesty, make sure we fight back on Obamacare and repeal and replace it with the right thing, do a new tax code, require people who get social, in our social welfare systems to, if they're able-bodied, they should work. Stop the corporate welfare, something we've talked a lot about at this setting. So to me, that is the bigger concern in what we're all about focusing on.
Matt Floyd with Roll Call. Not just to follow up again on that, because I thought it was a good question. Will you guys vote for the rule today? And second of all, what can you do if you face repercussions from leadership for voting against rules? What will you do? What can you do?
We haven't decided what we're doing. Some people have, some people haven't, and we'll see what happens. I hope there's no repercussions, but we'll see what happens.
Matt, one thing I do see is TPA had a passage in the House. It's the other items they locked up in that, and I personally would supported that. I think there actually would have been more votes for TPA if it was straight up or down vote rather than everything they put together in a very unusual manner. And we might end up at conference. I don't see how extending the debate for 2 more months on TAA is going to have a positive outcome. But I guess that'll be debated on the floor. I actually haven't read the rule yet. I haven't had a chance to sit and look at that, and we'll move forward after I actually read the thing.
And Tim makes such a good point. All they needed to do was just put TPA on the floor, or do a TPA with some of the amendments that some people were asking for. All we're asking for is an open process. And what's happening here, and it's happened again and again and again, is that they want a top-down type of leadership that they tell us exactly the way every bill needs to be. And, you know, the House needs to work its will. The floor needs to work its will. When they combined it with the TAA, you saw what happened last week. If they would have put TPA on the floor, even without any changes, I think Tim is right. I think even more members would have voted for it, for TPA, and then it would have just gone to a conference committee. And then out of conference comes something that probably gets an overwhelming majority in both houses. But when they try to dictate what the final outcome needs to be, to me, that's not leadership. That's tyranny. And that's why there's so many people that are dissatisfied with what's happening here. And it's not just members of the Freedom Caucus. It's a lot of different members are dissatisfied. It's just some of us are probably more vocal than we should be in some cases. But
Yeah, I just want to echo what Jim was saying about roughly 2/3 of the folks are against this thing. Back home, I mean, the calls are overwhelmingly opposed coming into all of our offices. So, I mean, the press can go ask members. I mean, a lot of people are reporting 20-1, and then some people say, well, some of those are robocalls or whatever. So you can discount a little of that. But why is that? And the trade bill is somewhat linked to the unconstitutional amnesty, the end run of President Obama. And so corporate interests there are interested in cheap labor, and that raises profits. We're all pro-business. I'm free trade. I did a PhD in economics and trade. So we're all pro-trade, pro-business. But just look at why are 2/3 of the folks back home skeptical? Well, business knows for sure that they're going to get cheap labor, or in the trade bill, they're going to get lower tariffs. So there's lower prices, right? So they're better off, most likely, no matter what happens. What the folks back home want to know is, what are the repercussions on us, right? And so CBO doesn't score on the illegal immigration front, just because I can speak about that one legally. When folks come across the border, if you have 2 kids, that's $24,000 in tax costs. Someone's got to pick that up. On the trade bill, what are the repercussions that we can't see? Well, we can't debate it. We can't share it with our constituents, right? We can't have a debate with them. So we're representing constituents that can't understand the policy. So we're in a box. And that's why they're very frustrated, because they don't know. And there's an economist named Hayek who's got a thing called the fatal conceit. And it's kind of the fatal conceit for any of us to go into a room and think we get 400 pages of legalese, right? To think that we're going to walk out of a room and have the bullets squared away in our head so we know exactly what's in there and what's not. You all are in the press. You're seeing new leaks every day of what's in there. And then we have to go dig in. Is that there? Is it not there? And that's the problem. And the folks back home have no certainty, and they want to be assured that it's good for them, and it really is good for the country as a whole. And if it is, will be a yes.
Genevieve, excuse me, I'm going to apologize, and I'm going to have to leave after this remark. But I do want you to know that last night I did a teletown hall, had an opportunity to be able to have great discussion on this issue. We talked about the TPA, the TAA, and the TPP, and helped my constituents to understand what these acronyms actually mean. There's a lot of misinformation out there about that. They did ask me, have I read the TPP? Up to this point, I have. I've read the classified document. Are there things in there that I have concerns about? Absolutely. But what the TPA does for me is allows me to be able to see the final document. It allows the American people to see it for 60 days before it can be signed. That's not considered what I consider fast track. I consider that a slow track. We've never had that opportunity before. But I will tell you, by the end of the evening, we did take a poll of those that were on the line. We had, I think, over 6,500 people that were on the line and stayed with me for the entire hour. And at the end, we did take a poll, and well over 60% of my constituents said they agreed that we should have TPA, and they agreed that trade is good for our state. It's my state, it's me. Others have different opinions, but I thought that I would share with you that, yes, we did get a lot of calls in our office. We help people to understand just what each one of these pieces are, and last night in our teletown hall. And the calls that are coming back into our office now are, for the most part, very positive, and over 60% of my constituents are saying, yes, move forward. So, again, I apologize for having to leave. Thank you for having me here in this great forum.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We'll take one more question if there's one from the floor. Yes, sir, right here.
Jordan Richardson from Generation Opportunity. Next week, the House Judiciary Committee is going to be holding a hearing where all members of Congress can talk about their proposals to reform the criminal justice system. I was wondering if any of the members here today had any proposals they are going to bring before there, and what their hopes are for the future of reform.
Well, I'm a strong advocate of criminal justice reform. I have a couple of bills that I have proposed in the past, one on sentencing reform. I think it's really good that Bob Goodlatte is moving forward, as well as Jim Sensenbrenner. And I think there's some bipartisan support, and we can work in a bipartisan basis. And I think it's exciting to see the Judiciary Committee doing that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm glad we're looking at it. I think this is something that needs to be examined. A number of people have taken the lead, like Congressman Labrador. I know Senator Paul on the other side, and I think it's something that needs further examination. Look forward to it as a member of the committee digging into it.
Thank you all very much.